Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here, and welcome to my review of the Meze Audio Poet. First of all, I really like the name Poet. It reminds me of Shakespeare, and I'm not a literature guy in the sense that I didn't major in English literature or anything, but I've also been a bit of a literature guy in the sense that I've studied a lot of literature and I loved poetry growing up. So this had me at hello in terms of his nomenclature. That might sound silly to a lot of you, but names do matter to me, aesthetics do matter to me. I'm someone who is driven by a lot of, my sensations, whether these are sounds or, whether it's aesthetics and whether it's word choice, whether it's nomenclature, name choice. So I was really keen to try out the poet and try to figure out how lyrical it sounds, no pun intended. This, of course, is not the open back version of the Meze Audio Lyric because it sounds decidedly different and has new tech. Okay, a very quick discussion on the build, construction, aesthetics, comfort, specs, and all that. And then I'll talk about sound, and I'll end the review with some select comparisons of peer-level headphones that I think it trades blows with and in some cases surpasses. I will be comparing this with the Focal Clear, the HD800S. The Abyss Joel I've only listened to very briefly. I'll compare this to the Meze Empyrean, and just a quick hint that I think this surpasses the Empyrean in terms of its technical prowess. And I'll draw some comparisons to HiFiMAN headphones in around this price class, the HE1000 SE and the HiFiMAN Aria. Okay, to jump right into the build, construction, aesthetics, and all that. So as might be evident, this is a beautiful headphone. It is perhaps one of the most beautiful headphones I've ever come across. I do have very pretty ZMFs, but this is very, very pretty. I just love this pattern on the grill. This is obviously taken from the Meze Empyrean pattern. It's got this church window-like thing going on. It's very pretty. This copper sort of colorway is very pretty, and it does contrast well with this sort of matte silver finish. And overall, it's a very comfortable headphone. This obviously has the suspension strap, the comfort strap system, which I think is made out of suede and leather. This is titanium from what I know, and the rest it's the magnesium chassis, which keeps the weight down. And honestly, guys, it is one of the most comfortable headphones I've had the pleasure of wearing. Of course, I have to look where the right and left is. This is left. So this is what it looks like on my rather gargantuan head. So it looks fine insofar as Meze aesthetics go. And the cups are smaller, guys. And this also has the AMTS sort of waveguide system that is patented by Dan Clark, and Meze has borrowed it. And it does affect the sound. It makes it very, very spacious sounding, I think. And it also brings the mid-range forward. But more on sound later. Generally, the main takeaway in terms of the technology is that it does have its, planar drivers, the isobaric planar drivers. But on top of that, it also has the AMTS technology. And and it's got smaller cups. It's again built to perfection. It's super comfortable. A lot of cup swivel. Lightweight, ergonomic, and very easy to drive at, I think it's got about 55 ohms in impedance and 104 decibels in sensitivity. Okay, now to talk about sound. It has a very interesting sound. It does have the traditional Meze sound, but I do think it's more of a departure than it is contiguous. Because the traditional Meze sound that we have come to love is a warm, mid-bassy sound with, somewhat polite upper mids, which can make it sound a bit muddy and not tonally correct if you are a Harman aficionado. And then, of course, it's got a lot of air frequencies in around 10 kilohertz and above. So that's a traditional Meze sound, which, again, Harman enthusiasts did not like. But a lot of others did because it sounded more natural and had a lot more body and note weight. Note weight is something that does happen when you take down your upper mids a bit and or you have more mid bass. So note weight is something that's important for those of us who like note weight, who like a richer sound because we think it's more natural tonally and timbrally. But of course, you have had your massive sort of doins of Harman sort of enthusiasts who have long attacked Meze headphones, and maybe attack is a very strong word, provided constructive criticism to Meze headphones, which Meze did absorb and respond to by retuning the Meze Empyrean. And when they came out with the Meze Empyrean 2, it had more pin gain and all that, right? So we all know the history. And then you had the Meze 109 Pro, which a lot of the harmony aficionado guys liked because it had more pin gain and less mid bass, and it sounded spacious and all that, right? So people applauded the fact that Meze was responding to influencers. I was one of those who thought Meze should have a wider palette of sound, and I welcomed the Meze Empyrean 2, but I think the Meze Empyrean 1 is very relevant because of what it does very differently, because your chains matter, your amplifier matters, your DAC matters, and if you haven't heard the difference from your DAC or your amplifier, you probably haven't heard very good amplifiers and DACs, or a wide enough variety, or you were just in denial, or you were just trying to play to the larger crowd, which don't believe in these sorts of things, because you end up having to spend a lot of money to experience these sorts of things, and perhaps it's easier to sell to the masses than it is to a smaller community of flagship owners for whom these differences are as important as night and day, like it is for me and a lot of my friends. Guys, I speak as an audiophile, I'm here, and not as much as an influencer, because it would have been far easier for me as an influencer to talk to a more generic audience than to those who spend a lot of money on chains. Okay, with that out of the way, so this sounds like no other Meze. It has more sub bass, and then I think the Meze 109 Pro does. This has less mids, or lower mids to be precise, than the Meze Empyrean does. So it's not as dark and chocolatey and warm as the Meze Empyrean 1 was. This has the upper air frequencies that most Mezes do. This has the solidity and tactility in the bass that, I really, really crave. So overall, to summarize what it sounds like, it sounds tonally correct because bass is very well extended. So there's a lot of sub bass. Upper mids are forward, but not as forward as Harman would want you to be, but they're forward. I don't think people will complain about upper mids recession here. It's got a fair amount of lower treble as well, so between 3 and 6 kilohertz, it's quite filled out, and it's sort of hear it. And it has a bunch of air frequencies, right? A bunch of energy in the upper treble. So the resultant sound is somewhat neutral bright. So yes, in that it does remind me of the 109 Pro. And I think where this headphone becomes interesting for me, and it might be the case for you, is when I talk about the subjective parameters or the technical performance parameters. Okay, so when I talk about technical performance, I usually talk about resolution, I talk about sound stage, I talk about imaging, I talk about dynamics, I talk about timbre. The thing that stands out about this is its sound stage. Again, the sound stage, in order for it to be fully unlocked, and again, I'm not suggesting you get a $10,000 amp for this, but guys, I have tried this with several amps, and I do happen to own a $10,000 amp, and I would be not doing my job if I didn't tell you what it sounds like of a $10,000 amp. So I want to start with that, because that's when you're unlocking its full performance. It sounds ridiculous. This is a $2,000 headphone, and no one's going to find this useful, but I just want to give you a sense of its maximal or maximum performance, right? Off my Audma Maestro HPA1, which is a beautiful solid state amp, the best in the business, barring some technical issues I'm having with the Audma, which I'll talk more about once I get my replacement, which is going to happen in a week from the time of filming this review. It sounds massively wide. It sounds as wide as the HD800S. Adjusting for how wide the Audma sounds, it still sounds extremely wide. Like, this is not the Audma's Elisa circuit in operation, which does make things sound wide. When I A/B this with other headphones, the staging scales more with Audma's power and its circuitry. So what I want to say is that with very good amps, this staging here is gargantuan. I kid you not, it rivals and I think it dwarfs the HD800S for staging width. It just sounds all-encompassing, and I do think the frequency response has had a part to play with this because of the air frequencies. It just sounds amazing, and with live music, this comes alive because when people are clapping and the audience is cheering, you really feel like you're transported to that sort of venue because you're just surrounded and you're just like, it's like sounds are washing all over you, right? So the staging is something I'm starting with because it's absolutely stunning. And Meze headphones do tend to soar in terms of their staging. Even the rich and chocolatey Meze Empyrean 1 with the right source had massive images and a huge sound. This does as well. And because now I'm being trained by the Imanis, which has this massive images and huge sound, a lot of headphones to me now, even open back, sound like closed backs because of the huge sound of the Imanis. And when I say huge sound, and I keep repeating that expression, what I mean to say, a sense of grandiosity to the images and the staging, which I do get with the HD800S. I get that with the Hyphaman Aria, with the oval-shaped Hyphamans. I've had it with the Hyphaman Shangri-La Senior and with Meze headphones. And this in particular, so even though you're going from a $3,000 headphone to a $2,000 headphone once you move from the Meze Empyrean OG or the Meze Empyrean 2 to this $2,000 Meze Poet, I almost think that this not just straight blows with the Meze Empyrean OG, but this might, because of the AMTS system, surpass it just a bit in terms of how much the soundstage size, front to back, right to left, and top to bottom scales with proper amplification. And I also have a very good jack at the Mola Tambaki that you might be able to see over there. It's sandwiched between my CD player and the Felix Audio Euphoria. Okay, so the first and foremost, soundstage. Secondly, imaging is extremely precise. I get inky black void as the sort of backdrop, and I get these images popping out of the woodwork and very precise, very distinct, very multi-layered. And imaging is absolutely to die for. I have only heard this level of imaging at this price point from the likes of Hyphaman headphones. Hyphaman headphones, oval-shaped ones, do soundstage and imaging exceedingly well, and this matches that level of imaging preciseness, which is unique for, I think, a lot of Mezes, because even the Empyrean does not give me this sort of precision in imaging. The Empyrean imaging can sometimes be a bit clustered, a bit congealed, and perhaps not very lifelike. This sounds extremely lifelike, technical and precise with this imaging. So the AMTS technology has, I think, escalated what this can do in terms of technical prowess compared to the Empyrean. So this is a wonderful experiment from Meze, and I really applaud Antonio Meze for this. Okay, I do want to talk about resolution, because resolution is often what you pay for when you pay bigger bucks for these headphones. It is not a cheap headphone. It's $2,000. A lot of you might max out at this sort of price point and want this to be your one and done. And I'll talk about how this can be your one and done. But in terms of resolution, this is massively resolving. And I'm quite certain, although I don't have the Meze Empyrean OG with me now, but I'm very acquainted with that headphone. I've owned it for, a couple of times. I think the resolution here surpasses that of the Meze Empyrean. And that could be an outcome of the tonality, because it's a brighter headphone with more upper mids and more lower treble, and of course upper treble, which also the Meze Empyrean OG has, or the Meze Empyrean 2 does. But this, to my mind, sounds more resolving, period. In terms of dynamics and slam, it's got dynamics. It's got a sub-bass kick, but it doesn't have the mid-bass punch that I think the Meze Empyrean OG and the Meze Empyrean 2 does, which does not make this a less dynamic headphone. I think metal sounds pretty great with this, but it's not as dynamic. So to give you a sense of I'm stumbling on my words. To give you a sense of how dynamic this is, on a spectrum of, let's say, the Hyphaman headphones and the Dan Clark headphones here, which are not very dynamic, and let's say the Empyrean and let's say the Focals, which are very dynamic, Focals being more dynamic, this is closer to the Focals, way closer to the Focal headphones than the Dan Clark headphones and the Hyphaman oval-shaped headphones, which I don't find to be particularly dynamic. So if the Hyphaman headphones were a 1 and the Focal Utopia or the Focal Clear was a 10, I would say this would be like a 6.5 in terms of dynamics. Fairly dynamic, pretty neutral in dynamism, but nothing to write home about. Timbre is great. It's brightish. The treble can be brittle of the wrong sources, so that's worth keeping in mind. And it does take to EQ like a champ. I'm not someone who's been a huge proponent of EQ, because I do think you get a lot of loss in technical performance, phase, and a bunch of other attributes when you EQ. And I do like to sort of experience different headphones, right? But I do occasionally EQ when I think there's something that I really want to fix. And with this, I do think EQ will help you, especially if you want to make it warmer tilted, and if you want to make it more clockwise tilted, and if you want to reduce the upper air frequencies a bit, upper treble a bit. Now, the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to overall technical performance, because I've covered imaging, I've covered soundstage, I've covered dynamics, I've covered resolution, it's timbre. Because, I mean, I have talked about how the timbre can be brittle, but I do really think that this headphone is very, very revealing. So it takes on the timbre of your jack and your amp. If I give you an example of my Audma Maestro HPA A1, which is a lush and sounding amplifier, it's not necessarily warm, it's a bit thicker, has note weight, but my Audma does nothing to hide the air frequencies. In fact, I do think my Audma can accentuate air frequencies, and it sounds very wide because of that. I wouldn't pair it with one of those sorts of amps that accentuate air frequencies. And I can't think of many examples when that happens. But when you do pair it with a warmer amp, a more forgiving amp like my Felix Audio Euphoria Anniversary Edition, it sounds beautiful. It sounds very, very normal. And the timbre increases in its quality and realism and accuracy significantly. So I do think you want to be picky with what you drive this with. In the odd event you have an amp like I do, which has a lot of air and is, creates a sense of soundstage, holography, and size, you will have to EQ the treble, upper treble. I just want to leave you with that sort of footnote. It's not a major footnote, but I do think it's worth it, because if you spend money on this on the basis of my review, it's better off that you know that it can be a bit, ever so slightly, amp picky. Overall, guys, if I were to summarize the sound, I would say it's a very impressive experiment from Meze, and a successful experiment, because at $2,000, I think Meze has surpassed what they've achieved with $3,000 in terms of technical performance, with a rather unique tuning. And if this is what Meze can do with the AMTS system, I think by the time they incorporate this technology in their flagship headphones, which I'm certain they will, you will get really, really technical headphones, which a lot of Meze detractors point out that they don't make the most technical headphones. Let's say compared to Hyphaman or an Abyss or a RAL. To finish off this review with some comparisons, I would take this over any Hyphaman in this price point, because it sounds more tactile and more punchy and more dynamic than an Aria or a Hyphaman HE1000 V2 or SE. It's not as bright as a V2, but it's almost up there. This has a better timbre than these Hyphaman headphones. And I think the build quality and aesthetics and construction is just crazy. And in a lot of cases, Hyphaman headphones at this price point would out-resolve Meze headphones. And you'd expect that to happen. But it's not the case with this one, because it's as resolving as an HE1000 V2, I think. And just sort of going all the way up there with an HE1000 SE, and more resolving than an Aria, I think. So it's a very resolving headphone. In terms of its comparisons with, let's say, other Dan Clark headphones, it's just not a Dan Clark headphone, but this does have Dan Clark's patented technology. If you compare this with the E3, which is a very well-loved closed back, the E3 is stunning and it's very airy, so it's very similar to this in that sense. I would take this over the E3 because I think it sounds even more spacious and open and wider, being an open back. And image had in particular stunning with this, despite the smaller cups, because sometimes I do think we correlate image size with the size of the driver. And that's a fair correlation, I think. However, all that being said, I would take it over Dan Clark A3. In terms of its comparison with Focal headphones at this price point, Focal has a lovely headphone, the Focal Clear OG, which I still own, and I think it's right here. And it's one of my favorite headphones of all time. Like, even if I own the Sennheiser HE1 guys, I would keep my Focal Clear OGs because I just think it's so well tuned. The bass in particular just sounds amazing to me, very succulent, very juicy, very sub-bassy, and it's just amazing. Overall, very balanced in its bass and its tonality. The Focal Clear happens to be. Like, this wouldn't replace my Focal Clear, but I have a particular bias towards the Focal Clear. I just love the Focal Clear. But I would keep it along with my Focal Clear if I was collecting and hoarding headphones, which I'm not anymore, because it does do a lot of things the Focal Clear does not in terms of its staging width and prowess and all that, right? The last comparison I want to make is with regard to the Abyss Joal. With the Joal, I've only had a very brief listen. I think they're very equally placed headphones. I think the Joal is very resolving. This might, I think, just be a little more resolving when amped right, and a little wider staging and bigger staging than the Joal. Okay, one last comparison, which the HD800S, which this also reminds me of. This is better bass, more impactful, way better extended. Rivals the HD800S for overall width and size of stage when amped right. The HD800S sounds bigger and wider of a variety of amps. This, when amped right, does. So I would take it over the HD800S. However, the HD800S is its own thing. I mean, you know, it's a very airy sounding headphone. It doesn't have the bass to ground the sound. It's very floaty and airy and with very beautiful timbre and mid-range. So the HD800S could still have people could still prefer it over this headphone, and that's what it is. It's a very unique headphone. It's got a superpower of its own, where this has many superpowers. But what the HD800 does, it does better than almost every other headphone, and it's very unique, sort of bright leading tonality that's just very floaty and airy with the wonderful mid-range timbre. And I think that floaty airiness really goes with the mid-range timbre of the HD800S, so I really value it for that. So that's it, guys. This is, I think, a wonderful headphone and well worth the asking price of $2,000. It can be a one and done, but I do think you need a warm setup for this. Like, I would pair this with hollow audio DACs. You know, you don't have to go all the way up to a Meze because that's super expensive. You can even have the Cyan DAC, which is affordable and a very good entry point. I do have a way of making the treble very smooth, so I would really recommend this with hollow DACs. Even with hollow amps, which can be powerful, but be very gentle in the treble, all the extended, so I think would work well. So do look out for those sorts of systems. Even IFI products have a way of sounding very thick and lush, so I would recommend even IFI products with this. And of course, if you have a tube amp, if you have an OTL, the frequency response changes drastically and beautifully. And I think Bloom Audio has an FR graph. If you want to Google it, if you want to look it up, I'll try to leave a link to the Bloom Audio graph of what this sounds like when it's tubed with an OTL, because that's when real magic happens and this becomes like, you know, a giant killer. So with that, I want to end this video. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, give this a like. If you like my work, follow my channel, and of course stay tuned for the next one. Bye bye.